The dust is fine here. It gets into everything. Under the bronze, between the teeth, inside the last thoughts of a man who knows he will not see the morning. The air is hot and still. A single sound carries for miles. Two men stand on a ridge. They are not speaking. They do not need to. One raises his arm. His hand forms a shape. The other man watches for 3 seconds. Then he turns and runs. 8 miles of broken ground. 300 men. 7,000 allies. All of them waiting for a signal that does not use a single word. Hold on. You carry more communication technology in your pocket than the entire Spartan army possessed in its history. You can reach anyone on the planet in under a second. And yet, you have felt the silence when your phone dies. You have felt the panic when the signal drops. You have stood in a building with 30 people and sent a text to someone in the same room. The Spartans had none of that. They had their eyes. They had their hands. They had a handful of prearranged signals that took years to drill. And they communicated across distances that would make a modern infantryman sweat. Do not make the mistake of thinking this was primitive. Watch carefully. The ridge where those two men stood was part of a network. The Spartans did not just happen to have good eyesight. They engineered their entire communication system around the terrain they controlled. Every peak, every valley, every line of sight was mapped, memorized, and drilled. When Leonidas sent a message from the pass at Thermopylae, he did not write a letter. He didn't send a runner with a long speech. He sent a single signal. A torch raised twice, a shield catching light at a specific angle. The man on the receiving end already knew what it meant because they had drilled the same signal hundreds of times in training. Here is the detail that changes everything. The Spartans did not have a communication system. They had a training system that produced communication. The two things are not the same. When you hand a soldier a radio, you give him a device. When you hand a Spartan a prearranged signal, you give him a reflex. The signal itself is nothing. The hours of drilling that made that signal automatic. That is the system. The modern man looks at the Spartan system and sees simplicity. He misses the depth. He misses the years of repetition that turned a raised hand into a command that could not be ignored. Now here is what never appears in the popular version. The Spartan communication system was not just about the battlefield. It was about the entire society. The signals that carried across the ridges were the same signals used in the agoge. The same hand gestures used in the dining halls. The same visual language that bound every Spartan to every other Spartan from childhood. This is not a communication system. This is a cultural nervous system. Pause here. If you have ever been in a situation where silence was the only option, where a single word could mean death, you understand the weight of this. Most men today have never experienced it. They talk constantly. They fill silence with noise. They assume that more words mean more understanding. The Spartans proved the opposite. When the Persian scouts first saw the Spartan camp before the battle, they saw something strange. The Spartans were not shouting. They were not preparing speeches. They were combing their hair. They were oiling their bodies. They were moving in patterns that required no explanation. Some historians call this discipline. It is not. It is signal. The Spartans were visible long before they were audible. Their presence communicated something that no word could. The Persians saw men who were not afraid, men who didn't need to talk, men who moved as one body across the ground. This is the first crack in your understanding. You assume that communication requires technology. You assume that more speed means more clarity. You assume that if you can just say it the right way, the other person will understand. The Spartan system destroys all of these assumptions. Notice this: the Spartan messenger did not carry information, he carried confirmation. The message had already been sent hours before through the visual network. The runner was not there to tell the commander something new. He was there to confirm what the commander had already seen with his own eyes. This changes the entire structure of communication. In the modern world, we send information first and confirm later. The Spartan did the opposite. The visual signal was the confirmation. The runner was the backup. The message was never new. It was always expected. Because the Spartans did not improvise, they drilled the same signal so many times that the anticipation was built into the system. Now, here is where it gets serious. The modern military understands this principle. Every soldier learns hand signals. Every unit has pre-arranged codes. Every mission relies on the same principle. The signal must be understood before it is given. But the modern soldier trains for a few weeks. The Spartan trained for years. The modern soldier has a radio as backup. The Spartan had only his training. And the Spartan system worked. At Thermopylae, the signals moved across 8 miles of broken ground in minutes. The Greek forces coordinated their movements without a single electronic device. When the Persians tried to outflank the Greeks, the signal network detected the movement before the Persian soldiers had finished their march. The man on the ridge saw the dust. He raised his hand. The signal traveled from peak to peak. By the time the Persians reached the rear of the Greek position, the Greeks had already adjusted their line. No radios, no phones, no satellites. Just eyes and hands and years of drilling. If you have ever stood on a parade ground at dawn under full kit, you know what this kind of training feels like. The repetition, the boredom, the feeling that you are doing the same thing over and over for no reason. Then the moment comes. The signal is given, and your body moves before your mind has finished processing. That is the Spartan system. Not primitive, preloaded. Now here is the parallel. You live in a world of infinite communication. You can reach anyone, anywhere, anytime. And yet you struggle to be understood. You send a text, and it is misinterpreted. You make a call, and the other person is distracted. You write an email, and it disappears into a void. The problem is not the technology. The problem is the assumption. You are seeing the crack in your own system now. That feeling of being misunderstood despite endless words. That is not a failure of vocabulary. It is a failure of training. Subscribe if you want to keep uncovering the principles that make real understanding possible. And drop a single word in the comments. Describe your biggest communication failure this month in one word. Clarity starts with naming what is broken. The modern man assumes that more channels mean more connection. He adds another app. He buys another device. He upgrades his phone every 2 years. And the problem gets worse. The Spartan looked at the same problem and solved it differently. He reduced the number of signals. He simplified the vocabulary. He drilled the same few messages until they were automatic. A Spartan did not need to say much. He needed to be understood. Consider this. The next time you send a text that requires 3 follow-ups to explain, ask yourself, is the problem the signal or the training? The modern man has not trained to communicate. He has trained to produce words. The two are not the same. The Spartan warrior did not practice speaking. He practiced signaling. He did not practice explaining. He practiced being understood without explanation. Here is the detail that most versions of this story miss. The Spartan communication system was not just functional, it was tactical. The signals were designed to be visible to the enemy. The Spartans wanted the Persians to see that they could communicate without words. They wanted the enemy to know that they were watching. The raised hand on the ridge was not just a message to the Greek rear. It was a message to the Persian scouts. We see you. We are ready. We do not need to shout. The psychological effect was devastating. The Persians saw men who were calm, men who were organized, men who moved as a single organism. The signal network was part of the intimidation. Now here is what never appears in the popular version. The Spartan system was based on limitation. They chose to use fewer signals because more signals meant more confusion. They chose to drill the same messages because repetition created certainty. They chose to rely on visual communication because sound carried too far and revealed too much. Every limitation was intentional. Every constraint was engineered. The modern man sees limitation as weakness. He wants options. He wants backup plans. He wants every possible channel open at all times. The Spartans saw limitation as strength. Fewer signals, clearer meaning, faster response. Watch carefully what happens when a system has too many options. You have seen it. The meeting where everyone talks and nothing is decided. The group chat with 40 messages and no conclusion. The email thread that circles for days without landing. Too many signals create noise. Noise destroys understanding. The Spartan system was designed to eliminate noise. The signal was either given or it was not. The meaning was either understood or the man had failed his training. There was no gray area. There was no, let me get back to you. There was no, can you clarify? The signal was given. The response was automatic. This is the parallel between the ancient and the modern. The Spartan system was not about the signal itself. It was about the years of preparation that made the signal unnecessary to explain. Now, here is where the comparison lands. You have more communication tools than any man in history. You also have more misunderstanding, more miscommunication, and more loneliness than any man in history. The tools are not the problem. The lack of training is the problem. You have never been taught to communicate. You have been taught to talk. You have been surrounded by devices that demand your attention and give you nothing back. The Spartan was taught to signal. He was taught to be understood without explanation. He was taught to read the movements of his brothers with a glance. The silence of the Spartan camp was not emptiness, it was fullness. Every man knew what the other was thinking because they had trained together for years. They did not need words. The silence of the modern room is different. It is not fullness, it is emptiness. Men sit together with nothing to say because they have never learned to say anything that matters.
The signal is a mirror.
The signal is the mirror. Every attempt you make to communicate reflects your training. If you are misunderstood, the problem is not the listener. The problem is the signal design. The Spartans spent years refining their signals. The modern man spends minutes. Now, here is the part that changes everything. The Spartan system was designed to work when everything else failed, when the battle was lost, when the line was broken, when the enemy was inside the camp. The signal network was still active. The pre-arranged messages were still understood. The modern system fails when you need it most, when the power goes out, when the network goes down, when the phone dies. The modern man is left with nothing. The Spartan was left with what he had trained. This is not a historical curiosity. This is a living principle. The question is not whether you have communication tools. The question is whether you have communication training.
Not the latter.
The question is not whether you can send a message. The question is whether you will be understood when the noise is stripped away. When was the last time someone understood you without explanation? When was the last time you gave a signal that did not require follow-up? When was the last time you communicated with such clarity that the response was automatic? The silence that follows these questions is not emptiness. It is recognition. You know this feeling. You have experienced it. The moment when words failed. The moment when explanation was impossible. The moment when you wished you had trained for silence instead of noise. The Spartan system was not ancient technology. It was eternal principle, signal, training, prearranged meaning, automatic response. The modern world has replaced training with tools. It has replaced automatic response with conscious deliberation. It has replaced clarity with volume.
We can't keep living like
The
this.
result is a generation of
Listen to
men
me.
who can speak to anyone and be understood by no one. If you have made it this far, you already feel the weight of that sentence landing. You didn't come here for entertainment. You came because you sense that the tools are not the answer. Subscribe to join a community of men who are choosing training over tools, signal over noise. And in the comments, define it for yourself. What is one signal you will remove this week from your life? The fewer channels you have, the more clearly you will be heard. Now here is the turn. You can rebuild this system, not the tools, the training. The Spartan system was replicable. They taught it to every generation. They drilled it into every warrior. They did not have a secret technology. They had a conscious practice. You can do the same. You can reduce the number of signals you use. You can drill the same messages until they are automatic. You can design your communication to work when everything else fails. The first step is recognition. The second step is choice. The dust on the ridge has long since settled. The two men who stood there are gone, but the principle they used is still available. The signal system they designed is still replicable. The question is whether you will choose to train for silence. In the next chapter, we go deeper into the agoge, not the popular version, not the legend, the actual structure of how Spartan training created men who could read each other with a glance. How they built a system that turned boys into men who did not need to speak to be understood. Because the signal was never the thing. The training was the thing. And the man who trains for silence will never be lost for words. The men of Laconia had no apps, no networks, no backup channels. They had their eyes. They had their hands. They had the years of repetition that turned a raised arm into a command that could not be ignored. If you are ready to trade noise for signal, trade explanation for understanding, trade volume for clarity, the ridge is still there. The training is still available. The question is whether you will climb it. The climb never stops. Once you see the system, you cannot unsee it. Every conversation becomes a question of signal design. Every misunderstanding becomes a reflection of insufficient training. The Spartan method is not a historical relic. It is a live diagnostic tool you now carry. You did not come here for ancient trivia. You came because something in the silence of the modern world feels wrong to you. You feel the emptiness in the endless words. You sense that more talking has not created more connection. The ridge is wherever you stand right now. The signal is whatever you choose to say next. The question is whether you have drilled the silence that makes that signal mean something. The dust has settled. The bronze has tarnished. But the principle remains as sharp as it ever was. A man who knows what he means does not need to explain it. He only needs to have trained for the moment when words are no longer possible. The answer to your question? Yes. It was always replicable. The only thing that stood between you and this system was the choice to stop adding tools and start building training. Choose. The choice to stop adding tools and start building training. That is not a historical insight. That is a living decision you make in this moment. Look at your phone. Look at the apps. Look at the endless channels of communication that have given you nothing but noise. Now, picture the ridge, the dust, the two men who did not need to speak. You already know which system produces understanding. You already know which system produces silence. The question was never whether the Spartan system worked. It worked for 4 centuries against every enemy who stood against it. The question was whether you would recognize that the problem is not in your tools. The problem is in your training. And training does not begin with a new device. It begins with a single choice to stop explaining and start being understood. The ridge is still there. The signal is still waiting. The only question left is whether you will stand on it. This is your moment. The signal has been given. The training is available. The only thing missing is the decision. Subscribe if you are ready. Not for more content, but for the practice of becoming a man who does not need to explain. And answer this in one sentence in the comments. What is the one signal you will drill this week until it becomes automatic? The reply you write is the first repetition.